My name is Blake Tarrant. I'm 41 years old, and I was 2,000 meters above a valley I'm still not allowed to name when my sister's voice came through a satellite line and told me that a man had taken my 7-year-old daughter's hand and broken her fingers one at a time. I do a specific job in the Air Force. I am a pararescueman. When somebody is bleeding out in the worst place on Earth, I am the man who goes into that place and carries them out. 19 years of that. Our motto is 4 words long: that others may live. I had jumped into burning ravines for strangers. I had held a stranger's artery closed with my thumb for 40 minutes, and I had never once been the man who was too far away. Welcome back to Cheating Tales Lab, where we tell true feeling stories about the quiet people who finally stop being patient. I want you to stay with this one, because underneath the anger, there's something genuinely useful in it. This story is about how organized cruelty always leaves paperwork, how a child's X-ray is a calendar, and how the fastest way to destroy a powerful man is almost never the loudest one. My commander took one look at my face that night and said 5 words: gear, birds turning, go. I wasn't flying home to argue. Chapter 1. The forward sight sat in a bowl of brown rock at 4,000 feet, and it had no name that anybody outside the wire would recognize. Blake Tarrant had been there 11 weeks. His team was 6 men and 1 aircraft, and their entire purpose was to exist in the 90 minutes between a man getting hurt and a man getting to a surgeon. They called that window the golden hour. Blake had spent most of his adult life inside it. He was good at it in a way that had nothing to do with courage. Courage was cheap at 3 in the morning. Everybody had some. What Blake had was sequence, survey, secure, extract, hand off. 4 steps, always in that order, and the discipline to not skip one no matter what the noise was doing. He had a habit, when a scene went bad, of going quieter instead of louder. His team leader, Staff Sergeant Emilio Ospina, used to say that you could tell how serious a call was by how few words came out of Tarrant's mouth. On the worst night of Ospina's life, the night the 2nd aircraft went down in the Wadi, Blake had said exactly 3 sentences in 90 minutes, and every one of them had been an instruction, and everybody had come home. He was 3 days from the end of that rotation when the call came. They had just come off a 9-hour cycle. Blake was sitting on an ammo crate outside the tent with his boots unlaced, drinking coffee that tasted like scorched metal, and Senior Airman Pax Kimura was arguing with Ospina about whether a burrito counted as a sandwich. It was 10 minutes past 9 at night, local. The satellite phone rang inside, and the radio operator came out holding it with an expression Blake had seen on medics before they told a family something. "It's your sister," he said. "She says it's your daughter." Astrid Tarrant was 38 years old and worked nights as a 911 dispatcher for Carrick County. She had spent 12 years listening to the worst minutes of other people's lives without her voice ever climbing. That was the thing Blake registered first, before he registered a single word. Her voice was climbing. "Blake, Blake, listen to me. You have to listen. Don't talk yet. I'm listening. I'm at Pinecrest. I'm in the emergency department with Emmy. Blake." And here she made a sound he had never heard his sister make, a kind of swallowed animal noise. He broke her fingers. Gavin broke her fingers. All 4 of them and her thumb. "One at a time, Blake," she told me. She told me he did them 1 at a time, and he counted. Blake looked at the rock. He looked at the ridgeline and the dark coming down over it, and he felt his own pulse do something very strange, which was to slow. "Say the injuries," he said. "What?" "Say the injuries the way the doctor said them." Astrid took a breath and read them off her phone, where she had typed them because she was a dispatcher, and typing things was how she survived. Spiral fractures. 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th proximal phalanges of the right hand. A fracture at the base of the thumb. Bruising to the right forearm in a band. And a note that said, in the flattest language in the world, injury pattern not consistent with reported mechanism. What was the reported mechanism? Britta told the intake nurse she shut Emmy's hand in a car door. "A car door does not do 4 fingers and a thumb in a spiral," Blake said. "I know that. The doctor knows that." "Blake," and her voice broke all the way open now. Emmy could barely talk. "She's on medication, and she was crying, and she kept saying she was sorry. And then she said something, and I need you to hear it exactly. She said, He said he's not done with me tonight. There was a delay on the line, the little half-second the satellite eats. Blake used it. Where is she right now? Physically. Room number. Pod C, Bay 11. I'm sitting on the end of the bed. I have not moved and I'm not moving. Is he in the building? He left. He left before I got here. Britta's in the waiting room on her phone. Astrid. He put the coffee down on the crate very carefully, as though it were something that might break. You are going to do 4 things for me, and you're going to do them in order. You're going to tell the charge nurse that you are formally reporting suspected non-accidental trauma, and you want it documented that you said the words. You're going to ask them to hold her for observation overnight, not because of the hand, but because you don't have a safe discharge address. You're going to not let Britta take her out of that building, and if Britta tries, you make a scene loud enough that 4 strangers remember your face. And you're going to text me the name of the doctor who wrote, "Not consistent with reported mechanism," because that doctor just became the most important person in my daughter's life. Okay. She was writing. He could hear the pen. Okay. Astrid. Yeah. I'm coming. Chapter 2. Lieutenant Colonel Dermot Bergen commanded the rescue squadron, and he had been a flyer for 26 years, which meant he had learned to read men the way pilots read weather. He came out of the operations tent because somebody had told him Tarrant was standing in the open, not moving, and Tarrant did not stand in the open, not moving. Bergen looked at him for maybe 4 seconds. Talk. My daughter's 7, sir. My ex-wife's husband broke her hand tonight. 4 fingers and the thumb, individually. She's in a hospital in Colorado and he told her he wasn't finished with her. The colonel did not say I'm sorry, and Blake would be grateful for that for the rest of his life, because I'm sorry is a thing you say when there's nothing to be done. Emergency leave, effective now. Red Cross message will catch up to the paperwork. Bergen turned his head toward the pad, where a rotor was already turning, because Bergen had ordered it turning, before he came outside. Gear. Birds turning. You're on the tanker out of the ring, at 0200. Blake got his ruck. Ospina was already packing it, which is a thing that happens in a team, and which is worth more than any speech. Kimura pressed a granola bar into his hand like it would help. On the pad, with the noise coming up around them, Ospina put his mouth next to Blake's ear. Hey, listen to me. You have got about 30 hours in the air. 30 hours is a long time to build something bad in your head. Blake looked at him. So build the right thing, Ospina said. That was the whole conversation. Blake climbed in. 31 hours, as it turned out. A helicopter, then a C-17 with a cargo bay so cold he could see his breath. Then a commercial connection out of Baltimore, with a middle seat and a man beside him who wanted to talk about the Broncos. Blake was still in a flight suit under a borrowed jacket. He spent the first 8 hours doing what Ospina had told him to do, and it was harder than any evolution he had ever run. Because the thing he wanted to build was simple. He knew exactly how to end Gavin Lindstrom. Blake was a paramedic who had been taught, as a professional necessity, precisely how a human body comes apart, and he had been taught by very serious people how to make that happen quickly and quietly, and how to get out of a place afterward. He could have been in Wayland, Colorado in 31 hours and out of the country in 40, and there is a version of this story where that is what happened. The reason it isn't is a girl in Pod C, Bay 11. Because if Blake did that, Emmy Tarrant grows up as the daughter of a man in Leavenworth. She grows up being raised by the mother who told a nurse the car door did it. She goes to court and answers questions about her father for the next 15 years. And the man who broke her fingers becomes, in the public memory, a victim. So somewhere over the Atlantic, Blake stopped planning a killing and started planning a rescue, because a rescue was the only thing he had ever actually been good at. Survey, secure, extract, hand off. He got out a notebook and wrote the 4 words at the top of a page, and under them he wrote a question that would turn out to be the entire story. Why the phone? Not the fingers. He understood the fingers, in the ugly way you understand weather. Men like Gavin Lindstrom hurt children because they can, and because it works. But Astrid had said one thing on that call that did not fit the pattern, and it had been sitting in Blake's chest for 8 hours like a swallowed stone. Emmy had touched his phone. You do not break a child's hand joint by joint over a phone. That is not rage. Rage is fast and it is stupid, and it leaves one injury, not five. 5 separate fractures, applied in sequence, with counting, is not a man losing his temper. It is a man conducting an interrogation. Blake wrote that down too. Then he looked at it for a long time somewhere over Newfoundland, and he understood that his daughter had seen something on that phone, and that a very rich man had decided that finding out what she saw was worth doing that to a 7-year-old's hand, which meant that whatever was on the phone was worse. Chapter 3. He had married Britta when he was 26 and she was 24, in a courthouse in Wayland, with 2 witnesses and a rented tie. She had been funny then, and restless, and she had a way of narrating strangers in restaurants that could make him laugh until his ribs hurt. What Blake understood only later was that the restlessness was not a mood. It was a permanent condition, and he had been an 11-year attempt to cure it. He was gone a lot. That is the honest part of this, and he will not dress it up. Pararescue is a career of absences. 2 months here, 4 months there, a phone call from an airfield saying I can't tell you where, and I can't tell you when. Emmeline was born in a hospital he reached 9 hours after she did. Britta held that against him in a way she never said out loud, and she was not entirely wrong to. The marriage ended when Emmy was 4. It ended without a screaming match, which Blake has come to understand is worse. Britta said she had spent her whole adult life waiting in a house, and Blake said he knew, and that was that. The custody arrangement was generous to her because he was deployable and because he believed, at the time, that a mother and a daughter should not be separated by a man's schedule. Gavin Lindstrom appeared 14 months later. He was 48, silver at the temples, and he owned a company called Lindstrom Pediatric Partners. 9 urgent care clinics scattered across 3 counties, all of them painted in cheerful yellows and greens, all of them with a cartoon fox on the door. He had built them out of nothing in 12 years. He sponsored a youth hockey rink. He had a lake house on Carrick Reservoir, and a smile that arrived a half-second before it was needed. Blake had met him exactly 4 times. Every time, Gavin had been immaculately, aggressively pleasant, and every time Blake had come away with a low hum in the back of his skull that he had never been able to justify. He had learned, in his profession, to trust that hum. He had also learned that you cannot take a hum to a family court judge. There had been signs. Blake would spend a long time cataloging them, and it is the part of this that he still cannot talk about without stopping. At Christmas, on a video call, Emmy had flinched when a door closed behind her. In March, she had gotten very quiet about a cast on her wrist, and Britta had said trampoline park, and Blake had said trampoline parks are a menace, and they had both laughed. In May, Emmy had asked him, in the middle of a conversation about a cartoon, whether it was possible to get in trouble for something you didn't know was a rule. He had said, "Not with me, sweetheart." He had not asked the next question. He thinks about that more than he thinks about anything else. He landed at Denver International at 4:20 in the afternoon, 31 hours after Astrid's call, still in the flight suit, and Astrid was standing at the bottom of the escalator, holding a paper cup of coffee she had forgotten to drink. She looked like she had aged a decade. She handed him the cup, and she said, "She's okay. She's okay. She's got a splint and pins in 2 of them," and Dr. Kellerman would not let her leave the building. Dr. Anjali Kellerman was a pediatric hand surgeon, 56 years old, with reading glasses pushed up into gray hair, and the particular flat calm of a person who has told a lot of parents a lot of unbearable things. She met Blake in a corridor outside the ward, and she did not ask him to sit down. "You're the father, not the stepfather." "I'm the father." "Good." She opened a laptop on a rolling cart and turned it so he could see. "I'm going to show you something, and I'm going to tell you why I'm showing it to a man I met 90 seconds ago. I'm showing you because I have made a report and I have been ignored on this exact patient before, and I have decided I am done being polite about it." The screen showed a hand, his daughter's hand, 4 bones with fracture lines running through them at an angle like a wrung towel. "Spiral fractures," Kellerman said. "You get these when a bone is twisted. Not crushed, twisted. A car door crushes. It does not twist, and it certainly does not twist 4 fingers and a thumb in 5 separate events." She tapped the screen. "See the callus here? That's healing bone. That's not from tonight. That's from about 3 weeks ago on the 5th metacarpal. and it was never treated, and nobody brought her in for it. She clicked. Another image. This is a wrist film from March. Different hospital, uploaded to the regional exchange. She let him look at it. That is a buccal fracture and a healing rib. There are 2 ribs, actually, at different ages. Your daughter has been coming apart on a schedule for at least 7 months, Mr. Tarrant, and every one of those visits was signed off by the same physician. Who? Dr. Winston Roeder. He's the medical director of the urgent care group your daughter's stepfather owns. Kellerman took her glasses off and looked at him with something that was not quite an apology. She wasn't taken to a hospital. She was taken to his clinics, where his doctor wrote what he was told to write. Do you understand what I'm telling you? The reason there was never a report is that the man who hurt her also owned the place she was treated. Blake stood very still in the corridor. Somewhere behind him, a monitor was beeping, and a cart went past, and a woman laughed at a nurse's station about something. Dr. Kellerman, he said, I've been a paramedic for 19 years. May I ask you a professional question? Ask. If a man wanted to hurt a child regularly and never be caught, and he happened to own 9 clinics, what would he have built? Kellerman held his eyes for a beat. He'd have built exactly what's in front of us. Blake nodded slowly. Then he's built other things, he said. Chapter 4. They let him into Bay 11 at 6 that evening. Emmeline Tarrant was 7 years old and small for it, with her mother's dark eyebrows and a gap where a front tooth had been. Her right hand was wrapped to the size of a boxing glove, elevated on a foam wedge, with 2 pin ends showing through the dressing like the heads of tiny nails. She had a stuffed gray rabbit under her left arm that Astrid had bought in the gift shop at midnight, and when Blake came through the curtain, she started to cry before she said anything, and the first word she got out was not Dad. It was, sorry. Blake got down so his eyes were below hers, which is a thing you learn on scene with children, and he put one hand flat on the mattress where she could see it and left it there. Hey, Em, I'm sorry. You don't have anything to be sorry for. Not one thing. I touched it, she said, and now it came out of her in a rush. The way things do when a child has been holding them for a day and a half. I wasn't supposed to touch his phone. I know I wasn't. It was on the counter and it made a noise, and I thought it was Mom calling, and I just wanted to see the picture of the dog he took a picture of at the lake, and I touched it, and it opened. Okay, Blake said. His voice was very level. What opened, sweetheart? She looked at the ceiling. A movie, she said. A video? She nodded, and her chin started going, and Blake said, You can tell me or you can not tell me, and both of those are completely fine. And she said, There was a boy on a bed. Okay? Not a bed like this. A skinny bed with paper on it. Like at the doctor. And he was doing this. She made a small shaking motion with her good hand. Jerky. 3 times. And Blake's stomach turned over, because he had seen that motion in the field more times than he could count, and a 7-year-old should not be able to imitate a seizure. And he was making a noise, and a lady was holding him down on his shoulders. And a man behind the camera said something. Do you remember what he said? Emmy's face crumpled and uncrumpled. He said, Don't chart it. Blake did not move for a moment. Behind him, Astrid made a small sound. And then what happened, Em? Gavin came in the kitchen. She said his name the way you'd say the name of a weather event, and he saw me holding it, and he took it, and he looked at it, and he was really calm, and that's when I knew. She swallowed. He asked me what I saw, and I said nothing. And he said, That's not true, Emmeline. And he took my hand and he said, We're going to do this until you tell me the truth about what you saw and who you told. She started shaking. Blake put his palm against the side of her head and said, You're done. You don't have to say the rest. And she said, He counted them. And Blake said, I know, baby. And she said, He got to 5, and then he said we'd finish after Mom went to sleep. And Blake said, He is never going to be in a room with you again, as long as I am alive. And she believed him, because 7-year-olds can tell. She fell asleep about 20 minutes later, mid-sentence, the way they do. Blake stood up. He went out into the corridor, and he stood with his hands on the windowsill, and he looked at the parking lot for 4 full minutes without moving, and Astrid stood behind him and did not say anything, because she is his sister, and she knew what was happening in there. What was happening was this. Blake Tarrant had spent 31 hours believing that this was a story about a violent man and a child. It was not. A violent man does not stop at 5 fingers and schedule the rest for later. A violent man does not ask who you told. That was containment. That was a man securing a leak. And a leak implies a system. He turned around. Astrid, you're a dispatcher. Yeah. You have access to computer-aided dispatch records, call logs, every ambulance run in Carrick County, with times, addresses, and the complaint given on the phone. For county calls, yes, it's an open records request for anybody, technically, but I know where everything lives, and I can pull it in an hour. How far back? 6 years. Blake looked at her. I want every ambulance dispatched to any of the 9 Lindstrom clinics in the last 4 years, he said. Every single one. Address, time of day, chief complaint, patient age, and where the ambulance took them. And Astrid, I want to know how many of those patients were under 12. Astrid Tarrant went home that night, sat down at her kitchen table at 2 in the morning with a laptop and a legal pad, and did not go to bed. At 6:15 she called him. Blake, say it. 4 years, 9 clinics. He heard her turn a page. There were 61 ambulance calls out of those buildings. That's not crazy on its own. Urgent cares transfer people. But 43 of them were pediatric. And Blake, 31 of the pediatric ones came out of only 2 of the 9 clinics. Wayland and Carrick Junction. And they cluster. There are weeks with 4, and then 2 months with nothing, and then 4 again. Blake closed his eyes and saw it the way he saw a scene from the air. That's not an illness pattern, he said. That's a schedule. There's one more thing. Astrid's voice went thin. One of them was a death, 2 years ago in March. 5-year-old boy, cardiac arrest, transported from the Wayland Clinic to Pinecrest. Complaint on the call was reaction to medication. The kid's name was Sonny Draper. Chapter 5. Charmaine Draper lived in a rented duplex on the east side of Wayland, with a chain-link fence and a plastic tricycle in the yard that she had never been able to make herself throw away. She was 34. She worked mornings at a dental lab and evenings at a grocery store, and when Blake Tarrant knocked on her door on a Thursday at 7 in the evening, she opened it with the chain on and looked at him with the specific exhaustion of a woman who has been disbelieved professionally. He did not lead with his story. He led with a photograph of his daughter's X-ray on his phone. Charmaine Draper looked at it for about 6 seconds. Then she took the chain off the door. Her kitchen table had a manila folder on it that had clearly lived on that table for 2 years. She had kept everything. The intake form, the discharge summary that was written for a child who was already dead, a printout of an email, and a spiral notebook in which she had written down, in an increasingly unsteady hand, the name of every person who had ever told her to let it go. Sonny Draper had been enrolled in a study. That was how she said it, and she said it with a bitterness that had gone smooth from handling. She had been a single mother with no insurance and a kid with bad ear infections, and the nice woman at the front desk of the Wayland Clinic had told her about a research program. A new pediatric sedative, an oral syrup, being studied so that children wouldn't need needles for minor procedures. It paid $400 per visit. It came with free care. It had a glossy folder with a photograph of a laughing child on the front and the name of the sponsor across the bottom, Arden Pharmaceuticals. They said it was safer than what they use now, she said. They said the whole point was that it was safer. Sonny had a heart murmur. It was a small one, the kind pediatricians describe as innocent, and it was in his chart, and it was... Charmaine learned much later, from a lawyer who then stopped returning her calls, an absolute exclusion from that study. Children with any cardiac finding were not eligible. It was written in the protocol in bold. They enrolled him anyway, Blake said. They enrolled him anyway. She turned the notebook around, and when I asked afterward, the doctor told me my son had a rare reaction that nobody could have predicted. And then a man came to my house. What man? Big. 50s. Gray crew cut, gray suit, talked like a cop. She looked up. He said his name was Farron Boland, and he was the director of compliance, and he was very, very sorry, and he had a check. $22,000, and a paper for me to sign. Did you sign it? I had a funeral to pay for, Charmaine Draper said. They sat in her kitchen for 3 hours. She told him things she had told 4 other people who had all found reasons not to hear them. That the study coordinator had done Sonny's vitals in a back room instead of the exam room. That she had once seen a nurse redo a blood pressure 4 times and then write down a number that wasn't any of them. That the clinic had a second computer system, one that the front desk staff called the clean file. At 11 at night, standing in her doorway, Blake asked the only question that mattered. Mrs. Draper, is there anyone who worked there who wasn't okay with it? And Charmaine Draper, who had been waiting 2 years for somebody to ask her a question in that direction, said, there was a girl, young, dark hair, always looked like she hadn't slept. She was the one who held Sonny's hand while they did the blood draw, and she was the only one who used his name. She rubbed her forehead. Dessa. Her name was Dessa. She sent me a card when he died. There was no return address on it, but she signed it. Dessa Vandenberg was 24 years old and had been a clinical research coordinator at Cardinal Ridge Clinical Research, Gavin Lindstrom's research arm, for 2.5 years. She had a biology degree from a state school, $71,000 in student loans, and a growing certainty that she was going to prison. Blake did not approach her at work. He found out where she got coffee and he sat down across from her on a Saturday morning with 2 cups and no preamble. My name is Blake Tarrant. 11 days ago, Gavin Lindstrom broke my 7-year-old daughter's fingers one at a time because she opened his phone and saw a video of a child seizing on an exam table while a man behind the camera said, "Don't chart it." I'm not a police officer, I'm not a reporter, and I'm not recording this. I'm going to sit here and drink this coffee, and if you get up and leave, I will never contact you again. Dessa Vandenberg did not get up. She put both hands around her cup and started crying so quietly that the man at the next table never looked over. Was it a boy about 4, she said. Blonde, in a blue shirt with a dinosaur? I don't know. My daughter's 7 and she saw 11 seconds of it. His name is Jonas, Dessa said. He's fine. He was fine after. That's the... She pressed the heel of her hand against her eye. That's the thing nobody understands. Most of them are fine. That's how you keep doing it. Then she told him. Cardinal Ridge ran 12 to 15 pediatric trials at any given time. The money was per patient. A sponsor paid a site somewhere between $6,000 and $11,000 for every child enrolled and completed. A site that enrolled fast got more trials. A site that enrolled fastest in the country got what the industry called preferred status, and Cardinal Ridge had held preferred status with Arden Pharmaceuticals for 3 consecutive years. They got there by enrolling children who did not qualify. Every protocol has exclusions, Dessa said. Cardiac findings, asthma, weight, prior reactions. Kids who don't qualify are the majority of the kids who walk in the door. So, she stopped. So you fix the source documents. You write down a blood pressure that works. You write a weight that works. You leave the murmur off the history. And then that number goes into the sponsor's database. And it's true forever, because nobody ever looks at the paper again. Who does the fixing? Dr. Roeder signs. Coordinators write. Farron Boland handles anybody who asks questions. She looked at him. And Gavin films. Blake set his cup down. Films. He films the visits. All of them, on his phone, and he keeps them. Her mouth twisted. He says it's for training. It's not for training. It's leverage. Every single one of those videos has a coordinator's face in it and a doctor's voice in it. That's why nobody talks. He's got 2 years of me on that phone, holding a kid down. Dessa. Blake leaned forward very slightly. Does the paper still exist? She was quiet for a long moment. There's a storage unit, she said. In Carrick Junction. They're supposed to shred the source documents after the sponsor closes a study. They don't, because Gavin doesn't destroy anything he can use. 4 years of original charts. The real numbers. She swallowed. The real ones are in pencil. They photocopy over them in pen. If you had the originals and the sponsor's database side by side, you wouldn't need a witness at all. The paper is the witness. Chapter 6. Aisha Rideout had been a combat rescue officer for 11 years, which meant she had once been the one who ran the mission Blake ran the medicine on. She had pulled Blake out of a bad night in a country neither of them named in mixed company. She was now, at 44, a special agent with the Food and Drug Administration's Office of Criminal Investigations, and she worked out of a field office in Denver with a caseload of dietary supplement fraud and a permanent expression of a person who is under-resourced. She listened to Blake for 50 minutes without interrupting. Then she said one sentence. "Do you understand that if you had brought me this as an angry father instead of as a scene report, I would already have thanked you for your time?" "I understand, because it happens weekly." She got up and closed her office door. "Now say the part about the storage unit again. Federal investigations are slower than television and faster than despair." Rideout opened a case. She pulled Arden Pharmaceuticals' submitted data for the pediatric sedative study, and she pulled the FDA's own inspection history for Cardinal Ridge, and she found something that made her sit back in her chair. Cardinal Ridge had been inspected 18 months earlier. It had passed. The inspection had been announced 6 weeks in advance. "That's normal," she said. "That's the part nobody outside believes. We announce most of them, which means a site with something to hide has 6 weeks to make a clean file." "Then don't announce this one," Blake said. "I can't just—" She stopped. She looked at him for a while. "Say the rest of it. You've clearly built something. You've got the face you used to get when you'd worked out how to get a litter down a cliff." So Blake laid it out, and here is where a man who had spent 19 years extracting people from bad terrain showed what that actually teaches you. You do not assault a position. You make the position move. He keeps the originals in a storage unit because a storage unit is boring, Blake said. It's boring right up until the moment he believes it isn't. If Gavin Lindstrom hears, from a source he trusts, that a federal inspection is coming and that it's going to include a records audit, he will not sit still. He is a man who has never once sat still. He will move 4 years of paper, personally, at night, because he will not trust anyone else to touch it. And a man moving 20 boxes at 11 at night is not a paperwork case anymore. He's a man on video, committing obstruction with the evidence in his hands. Rideout tapped a pen on the desk twice. "And the leak comes from where?" "From the only place he'd believe it," Blake said. "From his own lawyer's office. Which means it has to come from someone inside who he thinks is loyal, who has a reason to warn him, and who is willing to wear a wire while she does it." Dessa Vandenberg said yes in a parking garage on a Tuesday, with her hands shaking so badly that Rideout had to help her with the seatbelt afterward. She asked for exactly one thing in exchange, and it was not immunity, although she got that too. She asked that somebody tell Charmaine Draper that she had believed her the whole time. What Blake had not accounted for was that Gavin Lindstrom was also running a plan. It started small. A woman from the county's child welfare office came to Astrid's house, where Blake and Emmy were staying, and did an unannounced visit because an anonymous report had been filed alleging that Emmeline Tarrant was being coached by her father and that Blake was an unstable combat veteran with untreated PTSD who had made threats. 3 days later, Blake's squadron got a letter from an attorney demanding an investigation into his fitness. Then a man in a gray car started appearing at the end of Astrid Street, and Blake, who had counted vehicles for a living, made him in 90 seconds. The child welfare visit was the one that frightened Blake, and it is worth explaining why, because it is the part of this that most people get wrong. A caseworker named Paulette came to Astrid's door on a Monday morning with a clipboard and a tired, decent face, and she was not corrupt and she was not lazy. She was carrying a report that alleged, in careful language, that Emmeline Tarrant's father had returned from overseas in an agitated state, had made statements about harming his ex-wife's husband, had removed the child from her mother's custody, and was coaching her. Every element of that report was constructed out of true material. Blake had come home. He had taken the child. There was, in fact, an emergency order, and emergency orders look identical on paper, whether they were granted at 8 in the morning by a judge who read the x-rays or scribbled by a man in a parking lot. Blake did the only thing that works, which is that he invited her in, gave her coffee, and did not defend himself for 1 second. He handed her Dr. Kellerman's report. He gave her the phone number of the charge nurse who had documented Astrid's formal statement. He offered, unprompted, to submit to a psychological evaluation by anyone the county chose and to pay for it himself, and he wrote the offer down and signed it and dated it. Then he asked her to sit at the table for 10 minutes and talk to Emmy about anything except the case, and he went and stood in the yard so that whatever his daughter said, no one could ever claim he had been in the room when she said it. Paulette was there for 2 hours and 11 minutes. When she left, she said one sentence in the doorway, and it was, "I'm going to write that this report appears to be retaliatory, and I want you to know that I don't write that often." The lesson Blake took from it, and the one he gives to people now, is that when a powerful man attacks you, the instinct is to argue with the accusation. Don't. Bury the accusation in documentation, and let a stranger do the arithmetic. Innocence is not a feeling you transmit. It's a file somebody else can check. Farron Boland was 56 and had been a police officer for 9 years before that career ended in a manner not reflected in his resume. He was good at intimidating the kind of people who had never been intimidated professionally. He was standing outside a grocery store on a Friday evening when Blake walked up beside him and stood there, shoulder to shoulder, both of them facing the parking lot. "Mr. Boland." Boland did not turn his head. "Mr. Tarrant, you gave Charmaine Draper $22,000 and a paper to sign 11 days after her son died in one of your buildings. I have no idea what you're talking about." "You do." Blake watched a woman load groceries into a hatchback. "I want to tell you something, and I want to be precise about it, because I've noticed you're a precise man. I'm not going to threaten you. I've been told my whole career that threats give the other side something to work with, and they do. So I'm just going to describe your situation. Go ahead." "There are 4 years of original source documents in a storage unit in Carrick Junction with your initials on the chain of custody logs. Not Gavin's, yours. When this ends, and it is ending, Mr. Boland, it started ending the second a 7-year-old picked up a phone. He is going to point at you, because he has pointed at everyone his whole life, and the paper will agree with him." Blake finally turned and looked at him. "You've got maybe 11 days to be the first one through the door. After that, all you are is the guy who carried the boxes." Then he walked away, because the thing about a well-placed sentence is that it works better without a follow-up. Farron Boland stood in that parking lot for a long time. He did not call the FBI. He did something more useful. He called Gavin Lindstrom, and he told him about the conversation. And in doing so, he did exactly what Blake had needed somebody to do. He made Gavin Lindstrom aware that the walls were talking. A frightened man moves. That was the whole point. Chapter 7. The leak went in on a Wednesday. Dessa Vandenberg walked into Gavin Lindstrom's office at 4 in the afternoon with a wire taped under a bra strap and a manila envelope in her hand, and she was so frightened that Rideout, listening from a van 4 blocks away, put her forehead on the steering wheel. But Dessa had one enormous advantage, which was that everything she said was true except for the source. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to not be angry," she said, and then she told him that a friend of hers who worked at the law firm that handled Cardinal Ridge's regulatory work had let something slip at a birthday party, that there was an inspection coming, that it wasn't a routine one, that it was a for-cause inspection, and it was going to include a comparison of source documents against submitted data, and that the agency had already subpoenaed the sponsor's raw database. Gavin Lindstrom did not shout. Blake had predicted that, and Rideout, in the van, made a note of how accurate the prediction was. He asked 3 questions: when, who told her, and whether she had told anyone else. Then he said, "Thank you for coming to me, sweetheart," and he told her to take Friday off. At 9:40 that Friday night, a white cargo van backed up to Unit 211 at Carrick Junction self-storage. Gavin Lindstrom got out of it himself. He was wearing a quarter-zip sweater and boat shoes. He unlocked the roll-up door, and he began to carry boxes. There were, in the end, 31 of them. It took him and Farron Boland 95 minutes, because Gavin insisted on checking labels, and because at one point he sat down on the concrete apron with a box open on his knees and pulled out a specific file and looked at it under his phone light for almost a minute before putting it back. All of it was recorded on a poll camera that the government had installed 9 days earlier with a warrant, from an angle that showed both the license plate and Gavin Lindstrom's face. At 11:20, they drove the van to the lake house on Carrick Reservoir and unloaded 31 boxes into the boathouse. At 6 the next morning, federal agents executed search warrants at 4 locations simultaneously: the Cardinal Ridge offices, the Wayland Clinic, the Carrick Junction Clinic, and the Lake House. They recovered all 31 boxes, unshredded, in a boathouse, with Gavin Lindstrom's fingerprints on the tape. Blake was not there. That had been a condition, and he had accepted it without argument, because Aisha Rideout had said one thing to him that he could not get around. If you're in the frame, his lawyer gets to make this about you. So he was at Astrid's kitchen table at 6 in the morning, drinking coffee, watching Emmy eat cereal left-handed with enormous concentration, when Rideout texted him 2 words: "Boxes secured." Blake put the phone face down on the table and did not say anything for a while. "Dad?" Emmy said. "Yeah, Em. You have your face on." "What face is that?" "The one where you're being quiet on purpose," she said, and went back to her cereal, and Blake laughed for the first time in 5 weeks. What the boxes contained was, in the flat words of the eventual indictment, a parallel record. 4 years of original source documents, filled out in pencil by coordinators and then photocopied over in ink. 1,140 enrolled children. Rideout's forensic team, working with 2 statisticians, matched them against Arden Pharmaceuticals' submitted database. 219 children had been enrolled in studies whose protocols excluded them. 91 had a documented finding: a murmur, an arrhythmia, an asthma diagnosis, a prior adverse reaction, that had been present in pencil and absent in ink. Sonny Draper's original intake sheet had the word murmur written in a coordinator's handwriting and circled. In the photocopy submitted to the sponsor, the line was blank. And on a phone seized from a nightstand at the Lake House, with a warrant, and with a forensic examiner who spent 11 days on it, there were 406 videos. Chapter 8. Gavin Lindstrom was arrested on a Tuesday and released the following afternoon on a $2 million bond secured against the Lake House and 3 of the clinics, with conditions: surrender of passport, no contact with witnesses, GPS monitoring. Blake had assumed the man would go quiet. He was wrong, and it was the only serious misread he made in the entire affair, and he has thought about why. The answer is that Blake had built his whole plan around the idea that Gavin Lindstrom was a rational actor protecting an enterprise. He was, but the enterprise was not the money. Gavin Lindstrom had built a world in which he decided what was true, and other people wrote it down, and what had just happened was not a financial loss. It was a contradiction. At 11:50 on a Thursday night, 8 days after the arrest, the motion sensor light over Astrid Tarrant's back gate came on. Blake had been sleeping in the front room for 5 weeks. He was awake before the light finished coming on, because he had wired a small chime to that sensor on his second day in the house, and because he had spent 19 years learning to come out of sleep clean. He did 4 things in 11 seconds, in order, and every one of them was a thing he had done 100 times on a hillside in the dark. He put his hand on Astrid's door and said her name once, quietly, and she was awake. He said, "Emmy's room, lock it, call 911, tell them Prowler and a name, and stay on the line." He picked up his phone and hit a preset that dialed Aisha Rideout's cell and left it connected, face up, on the hall table, recording. And he did not turn on a single light. Then he went to the kitchen and stood in the dark, 6 feet back from the door, out of the doorway's line, which is the difference between a man who has been in a house at night and a man who has only seen it in a film. The back door came open at 11:52. Gavin Lindstrom had cut the GPS monitor off his ankle with a pair of tin snips at some point in the previous hour, and he had a 9mm pistol in his right hand, held the way men hold pistols when their entire experience of them is at a range. He was crying. That was the thing Blake had not expected. A big, silver-haired man in a quarter-zip sweater, standing in a dark kitchen, crying, saying a child's name. "Emmeline. Emmeline, honey, I just want to talk to you." Blake came from his left and slightly behind, which is where he had been standing the entire time. He did not punch him. He took the wrist and the gun with both hands and rotated the weapon back against the joint, the way you do when the goal is a firearm on the floor rather than a story about how tough you are, and the pistol hit the tile, and Gavin Lindstrom's index and middle fingers broke in the trigger guard as it came out of his hand. He heard them go. He is not going to pretend he didn't hear them go, or that, in the 10th of a second in which it happened, some part of him did not recognize the arithmetic. Then Blake put him on the floor, face down, and knelt across his shoulders, and the man began to scream. And here is where the story ends, although it took another 11 months in a courtroom for everyone else to catch up. Gavin Lindstrom, on the floor of that kitchen, went into a genuine medical emergency. Not from the fingers. He was 58 days into a cardiac event he had been ignoring for weeks. He had an 80% occlusion in his left anterior descending artery, and the adrenaline of that night finished what a decade of self-regard had started. His face went gray. His right arm went. He stopped screaming, which was how Blake knew. The nearest ambulance was 14 minutes out. That is not unusual in Carrick County at midnight. Blake Tarrant knelt on his sister's kitchen floor next to the man who had broken his daughter's fingers one at a time, and he took his pulse, and there wasn't one. He has been asked about the next part more times than about anything else in his life. He has never given a dramatic answer, because there wasn't a dramatic moment. There was no long dark night of the soul. There was a man in cardiac arrest on a kitchen floor and a pararescueman 4 inches away from him. He started compressions. He did them for 11 minutes. He did them properly. 110 a minute, full recoil, counting out loud, the way he had done them on a mountainside and in the back of a helicopter, and once in a river. And when the fire department came through the door with a monitor, he called the report to them in the flat-clipped cadence of a professional handing off a patient. Unwitnessed downtime, under 30 seconds. Compressions immediate and continuous. Suspected cardiac origin. Patient is a 58-year-old male. Then he stood up, and his hands were shaking for the first time all night, and he said, "The weapon is on the floor by the stove. Nobody touch it. There's a federal agent on the phone in the hall, and she's heard the last 9 minutes." Gavin Lindstrom was shocked twice in the driveway and got a rhythm back. He survived. He had a stent placed at Pinecrest at 4 in the morning, 11 floors above the room where Emmeline Tarrant had once been admitted, with 5 broken bones, and a story about a car door. People ask Blake why. Some of them ask it angrily. The answer he gives is not noble, and he does not pretend it is. He says, "Because I am not a man who decides who lives. I have spent 19 years being the person who arrives after somebody else has already made that decision. And the whole worth of me is that I don't get a vote. If I get a vote, then I'm just a man with an opinion and a set of hands, and so is he, and there is no difference between us, except which of us got to the kitchen first." And then he usually adds the part that matters more. Also, Blake says, "I wanted him alive. Dead men don't get sentenced. Dead men get eulogized." Chapter 9. The trial was not really a trial. It was 11 months of paper landing on a table. Gavin Lindstrom was charged federally with conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud, wire fraud, making false statements in reports required under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, obstruction of justice, and witness tampering, and by the state of Colorado with attempted first-degree murder, first-degree burglary, felony menacing, and 11 counts of child abuse resulting in serious bodily injury, 5 of those for one night in a kitchen in Wayland, and 6 more for the 7 months that came before it, because Dr. Anjali Kellerman had testified for 2.5 hours about what a healing callus is and what a spiral fracture means, and how a hand tells time. Farron Boland got there first after all. He walked into the U.S. Attorney's office 9 days before the indictment came down, with a lawyer and a box of his own, and he gave them the chain of custody logs and 11 recorded conversations he had been keeping for 4 years for exactly this purpose. He got 51 months. Blake does not have any feelings about that one way or the other. Dr. Winston Roeder surrendered his medical license and pleaded to false statements. He got 33 months and a lifetime exclusion from federal health programs, which for a physician is the more permanent of the 2 sentences. Dessa Vandenberg testified for a day and a half. She was cross-examined about her own signature on 211 falsified documents, and she agreed with every word of it, flatly, without excusing herself once, and the prosecutor said afterward that it was the single most effective testimony he had ever put on, because a witness who does not defend herself is very hard to attack. She received a deferred prosecution. She is now, at 27, a compliance auditor for a hospital system, which is the closest thing to a happy ending this story has. Britta pleaded guilty to 2 counts of child abuse by omission and 1 count of making a false report. She got 60 days, 5 years probation, and a permanent no-contact order regarding her daughter that she did not contest. Blake has never spoken publicly about her, and he is not going to now, except to say that Emmy asks about her sometimes, and that he answers those questions honestly and without editorial, and that this is the hardest thing he does. Arden Pharmaceuticals paid $411 million and withdrew the pediatric sedative application. Their Data Safety Monitoring Board had flagged Cardinal Ridge's enrollment rate as a statistical outlier twice, in writing, and had been overruled by a vice president both times. The overruling emails were read out loud in a Senate subcommittee hearing. 1,140 families were notified. Charmaine Draper sat in the front row of a federal courtroom on a Tuesday in September and heard a judge say her son's name, which is a thing she had been told, for 2 years, would never happen. Gavin Lindstrom is serving 41 years. He will be 99 when he is eligible. Emmeline Tarrant is 9 now. She had a second surgery on the 4th finger, and she has a scar like a small white comma on the back of her hand, and full function, and she plays the cello badly and loudly. She is, according to a therapist Blake trusts, doing better than anyone had a right to expect, which the therapist says has less to do with the therapy than with the fact that when she told her father what happened, he believed her inside of 1 second and never once asked her if she was sure. Blake separated from the Air Force at 19 years and 8 months, 4 months short of a 20-year retirement, which is a thing that cost him a great deal of money and which he describes as the easiest calculation he has ever run. He teaches now. He runs tactical medicine and rescue courses for fire departments and flight crews across 4 states, and he is home 5 nights a week. The last thing is this. On the day of the sentencing, in the hallway outside the courtroom, a woman Blake had never met stopped him. She said her daughter had been enrolled at the Carrick Junction Clinic in 2022, and that she had spent 3 years believing she had done something wrong as a mother, and she asked him how he had known to look. And Blake told her the truth, which is that he hadn't known anything. He had only noticed that the punishment didn't match the crime, that nobody breaks a child's fingers one at a time over a phone unless they're afraid of what's on it, and that once he noticed that, everything else was just work. That's the end of it, but I want to tell you the part that I actually think about, and it isn't the kitchen. It's a Tuesday in March, 7 months before any of this, when my daughter asked me on a video call whether you could get in trouble for something you didn't know was a rule. And I said, "Not with me, sweetheart," and I moved on. Because she was 7, and it sounded like a 7-year-old's question about a board game. That was a child asking me, in the only language she had, whether the world was safe. And I gave her a warm, loving, completely useless answer, because I was tired, and I was 11 time zones away, and it did not occur to me that the question had a shape. So here's what I'd ask you to take out of this. Kids almost never report. They test. They float a small, deniable version of the truth, and they watch your face. And what they're measuring is not whether you love them. They already know that. They're measuring whether you'll flinch, whether you'll get angry, whether you'll make them responsible for how upset you get. And if the test goes badly, the real thing never gets said, sometimes for years, sometimes forever. So when a child says something odd and slightly off shape, don't reassure. Ask one more question and make it boring. Not "did somebody hurt you?" which is a question with a wall behind it. Just, what made you think of that? And then be quiet. Be genuinely, unhurriedly quiet, and let the silence sit there long enough to be uncomfortable, because the truth almost always lives in the second thing they say, not the first. And the other thing, the practical one, if a child in your life is being seen for injuries, ask where, ask which building, and who owns it. In this country, a person's medical record is the closest thing they have to a witness that can't be intimidated, but only if it's written somewhere its author doesn't answer to the person who caused the injury. Emmy had 7 months of evidence written down by a doctor with a payroll number, and it was worth nothing. And a single X-ray taken by a woman who didn't work for him ended a man's entire life inside of a year. Find the one person in the room who doesn't have a reason to lie, then hand them everything you've got. That's all I've got for you. Thanks for staying to the end. Go be quiet at somebody tonight and see what they tell you.